Good evening, everybody, and welcome again for those of us who participated in our recent failed attempt at getting this live session going. And welcome to Quotes Get Gold. This is an opportunity for us to tell you what the Gold Institute is all about and make people aware of what we do. And just in case, right below over there is a link to make a tax-deductible contribution to the Institute. And we would very much appreciate any of those. Or alternatively, clicking on the support button on the screen and contributing to the series of programs. And tonight, I have a special guest. He's a senior fellow at the Gold Institute for International Strategy, Matthew Brodsky. He's an expert in Israel and the Middle East, and many of you have seen him on occasion or heard him on TV and radio shows, and he's got a number of books out there. And it is with great pleasure that I receive him. I always learn from him, and I hope that tonight we all can. I'm going to ask him to tell you about himself, provided that I'm not overridden with echoes again. And without further ado, let me bring Matthew Brodsky to screen. Hello, Matt. How are you?
Very good, Saul. Pleasure to be with you. Pleasure to be on this terrific show that you've been doing for quite some time. Yeah, so I don't want to bloviate on myself too much.
No, but a little bit. Tell us.
So I've worked at the Gold Institute for several years now. Before that, I was at Wikistrat, the Jewish Policy Center. I was the director of policy there. When I first got to DC in 2008, I started working as a Legacy Heritage Fellow at the American Foreign Policy Council and focused on the Levant, Arab-Israeli issues, Gulf issues, Iran, Syria, so to speak. During the Trump administration, I worked with Jared Kushner's team on Arab-Israeli issues. That includes the peace agreement that the Trump administration put down in January of 2020 through the Abraham Accords. And with the State Department, I helped on strategic communications, specifically with the Middle Eastern audience and a lot of television in the Middle East on issues such as Syria and Iran. So that put me in contact with a lot of people, which at one point or another inevitably got me invited to this wonderful trip to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia for a media forum that they were hosting just last month, which was an eye-opening experience as they move toward their Vision 2030 program. It's unlike Dubai, which many Westerners like to flock to as like the very expensive vacation type of place. Riyadh is actually a normal functioning working administrative city in arguably one of the most important Arab states in the Middle East. And it was good to see how far they've come in such a short amount of time, and to see get a glimpse of the kind of success it would be if they stick to the 2030 plan or their vision, and what that would mean for the wider region, since the example that they set is really large for their neighbors.
Yes, by the way, the first time I went to Saudi was in 1983, I believe, and it was a much different place. This is long before the 2030 vision, and it was completely alien to our culture. That has changed, and it has changed dramatically, and I don't think that most people realize how much.
I think that's an incredibly good point. And incidentally, when you say people don't necessarily know how much it's changed, I think the West often makes a mistake also of thinking that they should adopt what we do as we do it, like that our system of government is, of course, the greatest system of government, so that should work for them as a cookie cutter approach. And that since there are certain things ingrained in our system, that they should just adopt them rather than going about a reform commitment and a plan that they're following that will take years, but be done successfully and well. So I don't even think the West tends to have a good metric or a yardstick to measure the progress by, unfortunately.
Yes, no, I don't think anybody ever built that metric. When I think that today people can get a tourist visa,
Very easily,
that
incidentally,
yes,
which shocked me, but they made sure to stress it. It used to be you have to know someone who knew someone, and then it would take this amount of time. You can go online and get it done in like a day.
like a day, you needed to have a business purpose to visit. Now you get a tourist visa easier than getting a Brazilian tourist visa. Uh, you have places of entertainment, movie theaters. Um, I don't know how the bar situation is yet.
Where we were in Riyadh, certainly non-existent.
Certainly not existed.
Which
Although
will
I
certainly
noticed that
be
in
something that causes competition if you're looking for that kind of vacation. Of course, that's Riyadh is not necessarily like the vacation capital of Saudi Arabia. Everyone there is telling us go to Al Ula. There's Neom that they're building up near Aqaba by the Red Sea. There are other vacation places.
yes,
But yes, it was most notable that like every kind of fake-looking type alcohol thing that you could get, like this goes well beyond old duels of like the beer
yeah,
variety. Like
yeah. You
a
have
lot of stuff.
alcohol-free scotch.
Right,
Uh,
exactly.
but and I by the way, I did see in the plans for Saudi 2030 that they are planning on having uh, 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 full bars in certain tourist locations, which would have been totally unimaginable at one point. This is no longer the place where women cannot drive or go to the street by themselves.
Absolutely not. Look, it's International Women's Day today. I believe the Saudi 2030 plan called to have 30% women participation within the workforce. Again, they weren't working previously,
Yeah.
but they wanted to reach that goal by 2030. They're already at 37%. When we were there, we went to a musical that celebrated Saudi Founding Day. Again, that's a secular nationalist holiday, not an Islamic holiday, which was celebrating celebrating the founding of the state. And there's men and women together acting on stage, singing with musical accompaniment. Now, aside from the fact that the music was fantastic, and I, of course, love Middle Eastern music and the scales, but that was something that you would not have seen before. And, it's in the West, people think women dress the certain way. Like in Iran, you see the rebellion, the protest movement against having to wear the hijab, right? They're forced to wear that.
Right.
In Saudi Arabia, this is not a compulsory thing. I mean, like I've gotten to arguments with people who saw me post pictures on Twitter, and they're saying, "Well, ask them about it." Look, this is something that they choose for themselves. It's kind of like I got the impression that it's a Saudi Arabia today that is embraced and understands quite confidently the idea that it is the center of Islam. They don't need to overly embed every single thing in it.
Right.
about the religion into every single thing. They're confident about that. And now they see other economies around them in Arab states developing, other vacation centers developing, and they realize that they've always focused on the Umrah or the Hajj, basically pilgrims visiting either throughout the year or to come to for the Hajj in Ramadan. They want more. They want to attract more people. There's no reason they shouldn't go there. There's so much to see. So
Yes.
it's good to
Let me ask you for a favor. If you still have the echo cancellation, uh, please take it out, because I think that is creating some static on your end, and that'll improve a little bit
Does this
since
do
we seem
anything
to have
for
almost
you?
every other issue. Ah, now that's much better.
All
It
right.
you know, to the point you were just making, it wasn't that long ago that we had Mohammed bin Salman essentially tell the Saudis that their duty as Muslims to spread the word of Islam had already been done. Everybody knows what it is. You can get the Quran in any bookshelf of every library in the world. So now it's time to stop with the proselytizing and dedicate to the enjoyment thereof. We've done our duty. Let's move on. That is what's happening. What you are telling me now.
Exactly. They're really looking at a new future. They know that the future of their economy can't just be based on
On
hydrocarbons.
oil.
They realize they need to educate their people for jobs that are actually employable. Something we don't even do in the United States. When you look at the garbage degrees that we have in liberal arts colleges, you graduate with something that what's it for? In there, they're restructuring their economy. They're really digging into human capital, something that we've seen Israel do for generations at this point. They want to educate them, move them into different areas, and I think economically, it makes sense for them, and to open itself up. That's why I said it seems like a more mature Saudi Arabia, is because you have to be more mature, confident in yourself as a state, as a government, to say something, like MBS said, which is they got the message, right?
Yes.
Why don't you all out there come on in and see this place? Because that's kind of what they want. They made it easy, as we were saying, to get visas. It's something that people should experience, because whatever it is that they have in mind is not actually reality on the ground.
Right. This brings me to the next one. About maybe 4 years ago, 3 years ago, I saw something on Saudi TV that floored me, and that was a minister of state correcting one of the usual talking heads who, of course, had gone on a rant against Zionism and all that jazz. And this minister from the Foreign Relations Ministry is saying, no, 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 hold on. You're talking about Israel. You can say the name, which it's the first time that I heard Israel on Saudi TV, incidentally. And you can say their name, and there's no reason for you to talk about them in this way. They are a good neighbor. They're a democratic country. We should be looking to having more exchanges with them and imitating some of the things they do to progress. And I don't have to tell you my impression to see. Uh, uh, it wasn't Al Jubair, but it was that Al Jubair's second. Uh, and I'm like, pinch me. I never thought I would hear this. And then, the other guy attempted something about the invaders, and he turned around and said, no. In the Quran, the Prophet, blessed be his name, is telling us that God gave this land to the people of Israel. How can you be an invader in your own land? And I'm saying he's using the Quran to justify the existence of Israel, which is diametrically opposed to what Saudi Arabia's position has been for 70 years.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
and now we
there,
have all kinds of contacts.
right. I mean, the Abraham Accords could not have happened without the Saudi agreement on that.
Yeah.
And I think it's a growing recognition, not just that Israel is a fact, whether you say it or not. Like sticking your head in the sand doesn't mean that
Yeah.
the conditions around you aren't there. They know that. They're aware of that. But there actually is a lot more shared then frankly, and that will be long lasting between Israel and their other, Arab neighbors, that will be more long lasting than frankly, I think that the United States will be with Saudi Arabia. Because the fact is, every 4 years we get a new president who thinks that they're going to shuffle the deck, throw the dice, and we're going to redeploy out of here. Like we're done with the Middle East. We're going to go to the Far East or whatever, as though the Middle East doesn't get a vote in whether they're done with us.
Yes.
Israel is there, it's a fact. And they know that, and a shared threat perception, but also very much as you say, the idea that Israel has been, they weren't created as recreated as a modern state in 1948 under vast hydrocarbons, under giant oil fields. They weren't aware of the natural gas finds until a few years ago. They had to develop technology. They had to develop these sectors, which are precisely the kind of sectors that Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and other countries are really trying to
In
get behind.
desperate need to acquire.
And this is why you've seen not only an acceptance of Israel, but also a pushback on Palestinian official, basically their inability to move forward. You've seen this in various interviews, just dating back to correcting the record from Camp David in 2000, like the first attempt at a larger peace framework between Israelis and Palestinians, and correcting the record and saying, look, they're essentially saying we're not going to have our region, our country, held hostage to this
by the
issue
PA.
if their leaders aren't going to move on it.
Yes.
What's it do for us?
Yes, they have, incidentally. And what do you think of people in the US who still today insist that there is no solution for the Middle East without a two-state solution in Palestine?
What do I have to say to Americans who believe that the only solution is a
Yeah, because I don't hear that from the Saudis, but I hear it from Americans.
Yeah, first of all, Americans believe very strongly, apparently, when it comes to and I say Americans, I mean the peace process industry. There's an entire industry over the decades that has been built up and gets paid. They get paid by outside donors in order to keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again, which is the pursuit of the two-state solution, the fooling of themselves into believing how close they were to solving it. In a agreement in which during the era of the 90s to 2000, the Oslo process.
You're not talking about the Oslo Accords.
I'm saying during the Oslo Accord, which was the original point where the idea was, we know what the parameters look like if they just accept it, and they were just so close. Now, again, this was a nothing is agreed upon till everything's agreed upon deal. So what you had are a whole bunch of negotiations in which subsequent speeches, subsequent actions have demonstrated that they weren't close. They were light years away, and the final status issues really haven't shrunk. This isn't simply a matter of geography. And what you're going to have sooner than later, unfortunately, is in what the West calls, right, our interlocutors on the Palestinian side, right? They're the moderates in Fatah, the 15 or 14 year serving Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen.
Isn't that a contradiction in terms?
Correct. Now, who's the heir apparent? You'll find out when they start fighting on the streets after Abu Mazen dies.
Yeah,
so you'll have
whoever kills the most.
Correct. And incidentally, between them and Hamas, who is eager to take over the West Bank after holding now Gaza for, close to like 15 years or so.
15 years.
Right.
And
Hamas is a much better.
They tried their hand at the West Bank and failed at about
and
the
when
same
you look
time.
at the news today, and people are only looking at, these are some Israeli operations in the Jenin refugee camp or whatever, and it's devoid of the reality of who is stepping up there next in Hebron, in Jenin. This is the reality that's going to be faced. So when everyone talks about this two-state solution, it's like you're talking about something in Alice in Wonderland. It's going to be put in place by whom, followed by whom, by what,
and I have to ask you a facetious question.
Whose interest is it in? How is it like American presidents that keep doing it? What's America's interest in setting up what would clearly be at this point a failed state right now, unless it is dramatically reformed?
Yes. My facetious question is, how eager are the Saudis to have an Iran-backed Hamas in charge of a failed state?
I would imagine
besides
just
Israel,
about as uneager as they are to have the situation that they see in Lebanon, in which they had a much greater position in there, but have seen their position over the decades erode as a result of Hezbollah, which is quite simply an appendage of Iran. It is Iran in Lebanon. So no one is eager to see that. None of those Sunni Arab states are eager to see that, and that's why it's a natural. It'll be much more natural for Saudi Arabia and Israel to be in more of an alliance structure because their threat matrix is the same, and I don't think that's going to change. At least nothing from the Biden administration's Office of the Department of National Intelligence. Their threat assessment, which I believe was released just today, their section on Iran is not suddenly a lot more sunny. So, we're looking into the future.
Please, I haven't seen it yet. What is it? It's falling in Iran kind of crap again?
It's the Office for the Director of National Intelligence. So it's the annual threat assessment today. Now, you have to bear in mind that the first interim threat assessment during the Biden administration did list climate change and racism as like the biggest
threat to America. Yes.
So anything away from that, is making some form of progress, right? Incrementally. But yeah, they give lip service to the protest movement. Iran will continue to threaten the U.S. directly via proxy officials. They're committed to developing surrogate networks. They're a little weak on the nuclear issue, which is okay. They say Iran is not currently undertaking the key nuclear weapons development activities that would be necessary to produce a testable nuclear device. Okay, so. Right.
82%.
If I'm building a steering wheel and I'm procuring wheels and I'm getting panels to the sides of doors, at what point am I building an auto? When am I building a car? Because if you're doing everything and then you're going to say, well, when they screw that thing in, then it's a car. Then they've been building a car. But up until that point, it's just wheels and sheets of metal and,
Well, the IAEA just notified the world that Iran is already enriched up to 82%.
Right.
They're a spit on a throw away from having 90%
administration
enriched
decided
uranium.
not to take the issue to the Security Council right now. We just want to keep doing the same thing. The Biden administration is still wedded to having some form of a nuclear deal with Iran, far more so than Israel, obviously.
Probably negotiated by the Russians.
Right. It's hard to find.
I'm sorry, I can't help it. This is almost funny.
It is, because you can't find anything consistent.
No.
Like you can easily predict a lot of progressive things in the domestic context. You're like, well, if they don't like this, they're not going to like this, that, and
Yeah,
that's their thing. But out here, when they're wedded religiously to the idea of a nuclear agreement that does not work, that we know doesn't work, that Iran has cheated on, but they are so wedded to it, and then they're also wedded to their Ukraine policy, which, fine, but then you're trying to sanction Russia at the same time you're empowering Russia by being in charge of negotiations with Iran. Those two things don't make sense together.
no. Pick one. This is, they're mutually exclusive. I mean, you can't announce sanctions on Russia while the vice minister of foreign relations is negotiating on your behalf with the Iranians.
Yep. And
It, it,
incidentally, it
it's it's
also
insane.
probably, if you're going to race toward green energy, because that's the most important thing in the planet, God
Mm,
forbid we should use our own energy resources and then be able to
yes,
approach the Middle East from a position of, yeah, actually, we got what we need. We're here because we want to work with allies and look at security issues, not because we need anything. That if that's their number one issue, then maybe, just maybe, the Biden administration shouldn't be backing up the bus over Saudi Arabia 30 times since before and after it got into office, just so that it could go to Saudi Arabia hat in hand and ask them to start releasing more oil just to
more
help them
oil.
for an election. It's they haven't seem to have married up the what they would like to have in this dreamland that they occupy and how to make that work in a foreign
Yes.
policy, much less a domestic policy.
Now, when Biden went to Saudi hat in hand asking for oil, is it true that Mohammed bin Salman looked at him and said, "Alaska"?
And said Alaska.
Yes,
I don't know, but props to him if he did. I know Trump has, and a lot of Republicans have. They're
yes.
like
No, it is a no. I've had my fun. From this perspective, you did mention that Israel and Saudi have a similar threat profile, and I think that the strongest alliances are built by common fears, by common enemies. And both Israel and Saudi look at Iran as an existential threat. And I don't think one likes the idea of a nuclear Iran better than the other. How far do you see that rapprochement between Saudi and Israel go based on this common fear of Iran?
um I think it can go very far, but not overtly or publicly. Like Saudi Arabia still is the most important Arab state. Certainly, if you ask them, they will say that. But I mean, when it comes to joining a Abraham Accords type of agreement, or even a Middle Eastern security architecture, I don't think that that's something that they'll publicly do until there is generational change at the top, or until the idea of the previous form of a Palestinian state has finally been put to bed as something that's just not feasible. I think behind the scenes there's a hell of a lot that they can do and are doing. I just don't think that they want to be drawn into uh, having to comment and say things the way the Emirates and Bahrain does. Uh, each time that Hamas decides it's having an internal dispute, therefore it's time to launch 2,000 rockets into Israel, create this giant event, security event in Gaza and in Israel, and then have to have them comment. I don't see them. I see them seeing themselves as the big prize, which is obviously really interesting if you're a historian and you look at it back from who's going to make peace with who. Egypt made peace with Israel, and then you had Assad in Syria thinking, well, I'm the most important Arab state in the planet. I'm going to hold out for an even better deal. I'm the big prize. Right now, obviously, no one gives a rip about Syria because they're
No.
a security nightmare governed by Iran and Russia, the two friends who are, of course, working in Ukraine. And that leaves
Yes.
Saudi Arabia as America's ally, who's still out there. That I'm sure we'd love to bring into that security structure. But nothing's going to change between the threat matrix view between Israel and Saudi Arabia until the nuclear program is dealt with, and arguably others would argue until Iran, the regime itself, no longer stands as it does today. Because, I mean, it's a good question to ask is, how much are you going to trust an agreement that's not verifiable with a regime that lies and hates you? I would
That is
say
not
probably
trustworthy.
not a good agreement.
No, not at all. But yet, like we said, like you just said, not openly, but I doubt very much that the Emirates or Bahrain would have signed into the Abraham Accords without Saudi's explicit consent, at least to them.
I yes, I believe that 100%.
Yeah, because and I love it the way you say it. At least they see themselves as, and frankly, with every Arab country going on their knees to Riyadh, hat in hand, I think they are in practice.
They are, and once they move even further along their 2030 formula, it's a remarkable amount of human potential that's there. Uh, Doubling the workforce by including women, of course.
Yep.
And they will be very well positioned in the future. They don't lack people or intelligence. Like intelligence, I mean like brain power. They're going to work on their education system as they are, and I think it'll be very good for the region, very good, frankly, for the West. I think, unfortunately, the United States, we've had the idea of exporting our democracy. It was nice in theory. It had some disastrous results. Turns out people all don't want the same thing. I think whether you're talking about Saudi Arabia, whether you're talking about Israel, these
Not
are two
everybody has the
countries with
same
their own
idea of
people, their own
democracy.
history, and they
Yeah.
don't need to do what we've done. They need to have a system that works for them in their context. And naturally, there's going to be more freedoms as they're reforming toward that in Saudi Arabia when you want to get ahead more. Otherwise, the other examples are communism, which we've seen has failed, the Arab version of socialism, such as Baathism, which has been left wanting. It's a clear, mature decision that they're taking.
How do you see some of the works they're doing towards Saudi 2030 are literally seven wonders of the world type of thing? That I don't know how many hundred miles long building, the tallest building in the world. I mean, they're turning the desert into a showcase for ambitious architecture.
Yes. And other history, something that struck me, I forget in Petra. It's a tourist destination in
Yes,
Jordan. What
yes,
was the civilization from BC that was there? The the people who lived there that carved into
yes.
most Westerns and Americans will recall the scene from Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. The area at the end of the movie that they walk into is the vault that's in Petra. The same
In
people
Petra.
there uh, had the same construction, the same type of things were built in Al Ula in Saudi Arabia, which hasn't been developed up until now as a tourist destination, which they really are doing now. I mean, it already is, but between that and Neom, the city they're basically building out of the ground, and that's located by Aqaba, by Eilat, the two vacation ports where you
Yes.
can basically see them all on the water on the most northern tip of the Red Sea. It's it's amazing what they're doing. They're really focused on getting tourists there uh, because they know they have a lot to see there. There's a lot of history there. So this is something that they're focused on, and there's no reason they shouldn't be able to do that. So yeah.
Yeah. And it's, but I look at this whole thing with nothing short of amazement, really. So we have a Saudi Arabia who has advanced 300 years in the past 30, let's say ideologically. They were pretty much stuck in the Middle Ages, no more. And they're also becoming a more diverse society. They have large populations from India, from Malaysia, from a number of countries, because of course they need workers to do all of this building, right?
Mhm.
And these people have all different religions. So suddenly there is not a monopolic religion in Saudi anymore.
Look, not lost on me in this the Saudi Media Forum. We met with the CEO of the Saudi Broadcasting Authority, the few Americans that they had invited there. So our delegation, it was me, two of my other friends who I've worked with before in Washington, Eli Kohanim, who was the deputy secretary to combat anti-Semitism under the Trump administration. It's basically five Jewish people, myself included, and the Saudi Broadcast Authority chair. They knew what we were. They know,
No,
they know that type of thing wouldn't have happened 15 years ago, 10 years ago.
15
Um,
years ago, you would have killed for stepping on Saudi soil.
right? So, and I mean, me and one of my friends, we bought the headdress at a souk there. So if you were in the United States and did something like that, someone would come up to you with a crowbar, hit you on the head. It would be some lefty, and it's because it's cultural appropriation and you're a complete ass, and off with your head type of thing. The Saudis there were trying to show us how to do it. This wasn't a conversion process. They were
They
like
were they
happy
were
that
measuring
people
your
were there. We're clearly white-skinned Americans, and they're
yeah,
like, this is awesome. So good to see you here, and have you visited
yes.
this place or that place? They wanted to know about us. This wasn't the closed off, quote unquote hermit kingdom sitting out there. That's like, well, how can they, these foreigners shouldn't be here doing anything. They were like, welcome, come in, be a part of this, and drink more Arabic coffee than you can shake a stick at because, oh my God, is it really tasty? And do they give
It
that to
is
you?
wonderful. If you ever visit me at home in Virginia, my daughter, who happens to be in that area of the world, keeps sending me Saudi coffee, and I have all of the implements to do it the Saudi way, and it is delicious.
It is delicious, and also I
Yes,
got to get Israel to up their game on this. I always thought that Israel had like the best breakfast buffet spread in any of the
yes.
hotels I've ever stayed at. I was like, this is as good as it gets. Then I was in Riyadh, and I was at just the Hilton, and I said this to my other friends who had the Israeli buffets, and they're like, that's as good as it gets. And I'm like, just wait till tomorrow, you'll see what I'm talking about. And after that, they're like, "Oh my, you're
Oh
right.
my!
That's a
It's
good thing,
amazing what these people can do with a few bucks.
right?"
But so anyway, so we have a pretty good idea of Saudi launching into the 21st century straight from the 16th with no stopovers. Uh, there are changes that I noticed not only in the attitudes and culture, and by the way, That cultural appropriation comment is for a whole other hour of me laughing my heart off. Because
Yeah.
I hope they never eat a taco, frankly. Um, but we have this enormous jump, qualitative jump from the hermit kingdom and isolation and intolerance into an open society. Uh, I understand that changing the minds of the entire population in such short time is impossible. I remember an ad that Saudi TV was running showing a woman in the Saudi Air Force piloting a plane and saying, "Do you think I can't drive a car?" And she's
Smart
flying an
ass.
F-16, you know.
Right.
And another guy is saying, my sister does this, does that, does that. Who says she cannot handle this? And there was a massive campaign to modify people's attitude towards women working, women driving, women going about by themselves. And I think that by and large, at least in the urban environment, I don't know how it is in the little Bedouin tents,
Right.
but in the urban environment, they were immensely successful. They were able to do the switch without violence, without confrontation, worth mentioning at any rate. But in order to change other things, they need to continue teaching the population before they can announce the formal change, isn't it?
Yes, I think they've been very cognizant about that. And that's very much forward within the plan is to go as much as the traffic can bear. And like I said before, that with female participation in the workforce at 37%, it's already 7 points beyond what their goal was by 2030. This is one area particularly that has proven easily adoptable. Again, I was in a more urban areas, but yeah, from the same thing as as you said, it's something that they have done, and it's something that they have prepared the ground for. But I think we shouldn't discount the effect and impact of social media, which is also something that really contributed to the whole possibility that Abram Accords occurring. You used to be able to, as a government, control what your people hear and see. You could just give them your news source, and it's not like they would necessarily be talking to people over here or over there. Well, with media today, you can talk to anyone. And still out in Saudi Arabia, I'm still using WhatsApp to communicate like most Middle Easterners do, like I did when I was living in Israel. You talk to whoever you want. You can see anything on Twitter, which still runs out there like it does here. So it's it's I mean, I think perhaps what they saw when it came to more equality issues with gender in Saudi Arabia is that they were perhaps pushing on more of an open door than they realized, because that's at least in urban areas where people have access to that type of technology, that's something that proved to be rather natural.
Right. And again, I'm still flabbergasted that four Jewish American journalists can walk around the souk and be well received in a country where they would have been executed if found out not that long in my lifetime, literally.
Right. I'm reminded of Spies
It's
Like Us when was it Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd arrive in Afghanistan from a parachute and yell,
yes,
"We're Americans!" And then the next scene they're hanging upside down by their feet. Right?
yes,
Yeah.
that would have happened. Now, since we are in the area and we have about 15 minutes to go now, Israel.
Live
I
there, like
find
that
it.
place.
You do. I'm told by a lot of people, including my mother and my granduncles and my aunts, that it is, but I haven't gone yet, believe it or not.
Well,
Um, I have to. I have to go to the Yad Vashem and see what's about my grandfather in there. But it's been in the news lately, and not necessarily for all the good reasons. It appears that if the Iranian people rise up against the satraps that oppress them, uh, the US administration will not have so much as a word of comfort for them. But the same US administration, through its embassies, through discretionary funds they don't have to tell anybody about, can fund organizations to organize protests, shut down streets, pretty much like, not so long ago, Seattle,
like
Minneapolis, or
2020,
Portland,
right?
financed by American dollars to destabilize an Israeli legitimately elected government because they claim not to like a law most Americans do not even understand. But let me ask you a couple of hypotheticals, and then I'll let you tear me apart or not. It's your prerogative. I can't help but imagine if the US Supreme Court could veto any nominee of the president approved by the Senate to become a justice, like Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh cannot join us, regardless of what the president of the Senate have done, because a man who is under accusation of sexual crimes is not reasonable for him to be in this court. I don't think we would have put up with it. But yet, the Israeli Supreme Court abrogates to itself the right to override parliament, not only in the naming of uh, uh, judges to any bench, uh, but even to rewrite laws, not to advise parliament, we think this is not proper, but to literally rewrite laws and override parliament. Eh, And using a standard, since they don't have a constitution, there is no objective standard, they use the standard of reasonableness. So whatever this
Totally not
particular court,
subjective at all there.
no, whatever this particular court decides is not kosher,
Hmm?
uh, they can veto, they can rewrite, and it makes a mockery of the elections of parliaments and the establishment of governments that can be overridden by this handful of people. Uh, but here, nobody knows about that, and yet everybody's talking about it.
But we love a really good protest. And so when the Israeli left decided that they're going to try to enlist the American left and American left Jews, which is kind of the same thing almost, they really like to get their, arms up in the air about something that they don't really entirely understand. Because, as you said, the one problem with your example is, in your example, yes, anyone who is a conservative who would like to conserve laws and the way that the country operates would say, wait a second, the president nominates, the Senate approves, and the Supreme Court doesn't have anything to say about who is going to be on the court.
Right.
That's not how it works. The two other branches of government advise consent. That's it. Now, is it on the left? You can question that a little bit these days, right? Because well, okay, what do I get for it politically right now? So but it should be obvious to all Americans who understand that that's the way our system of government works, that of course is not correct. And so in the Israeli context, of course, you have a Supreme Court that's frozen as it is, that would simply like to multiply itself with these same very far left decisions that it likes to make. So it's a really bizarre issue for the United States to be weighing in on. But then again, I also think it's very bizarre when the United States really wants to like sick a deputy secretary of state or an actual secretary of state on Israeli zoning issues, and your line should be drawn over there, and no
Right.
patios but a balcony.
What
Yes,
what do you mean? What do you mean you cannot build a gas station over there?
right. This is this is things that Democrat administrations tend to really like to spend their capital on, which
Yes.
makes no sense. I wish these, as much as I think America is Washington, whatever, the shining city on the hill that people would like to emulate, please do not. Allies around the world, please do not try to emulate all things American, specifically really stupid protests that you don't quite understand what the issues are, and that will come back to bite you because
Yeah.
you have to feel once again that uh, when the left gets its way in Israel, these are types of things that will be used against them if they actually
Yeah.
are a law. It's not just a one-time show, as we've learned in the American context previously.
Yeah. But and by the way, since you say that, uh, I understand that the uh, proposals made by Netanyahu, which are sure to pass muster in the Knesset, uh, would favor both his government and future lefty governments, because it would stop the Supreme Court, which has been somewhat ecumenical in its interference, from continuing regardless of the ideology of the government in power.
Right. So the current thinking amongst the people protesting or the left, to paraphrase it, is basically this will benefit Netanyahu too much. So we can't allow this to happen, even though it's, as you say, a very short-sighted viewpoint, unfortunately. And it also disregards the fact that, I mean, for as much as we hear that Israelis hate Netanyahu, sorry, he's the longest serving prime minister in Israeli history. He was just
Yes,
reelected. He served for like some 10 years. He served before for a few years in the 90s. He's a really smart prime minister, and he somehow keeps getting voted in. So the democratic results of the elections are that Israelis say, yeah, no, it's going to be him.
right.
So if that's the
Well,
case, this isn't like the it's not a particularly strong argument, because I don't know that they would be throwing the exact same type of argument if there happened to be someone else who was leading a coalition government right now proposing this same type of reforms.
yes, indeed. And incidentally, this thing that they don't like Netanyahu much, even though he just won the election. So I guess at the very least, a majority of Israelis, directly or indirectly, don't dislike him that much.
Right.
Uh, but of course, the accusation is that he bends to the will of minority extreme parties.
Yeah,
But doesn't the left do
I
the same
love this
thing?
argument so much. And you hear that amongst all the people you hear that from. You hear that from center right parties, right?
Yes,
Okay, so ideologically, there's very, like people always ask me the question, well, if Netanyahu wins from this last election, right, compared to
yes,
Bennett, what are the major foreign policy differences or major internal differences going to be? Very little. You know why? Because they're ideologically incredibly similar. So
yes,
the people who complain about Netanyahu having really small special interest parties in his coalition government, hey, you know what? You could stop that large center of the right party by simply
yes,
stopping your entire idea, which is, I just can't personally serve with Netanyahu. It's not that I disagree with all of his policies. I pretend I do, but I actually don't. I just don't want to serve with Netanyahu. Then fine, serve with him. Then it would
right.
then there's no need for these smaller special interest parties that they're called to be in the coalition, because there would be enough seats since they already agree on the bulk of the issues facing the
On the
country.
bulk of the issues, and that includes Bennett,
Exactly.
And that actually it includes slapping too. It's
Yeah.
it's insane.
Right.
But
It's the vast majority. There's no reason there shouldn't be like 90 seats of a
yes,
majority instead of 61, out of 120, because that's the extent
right,
to which Israelis are center right politically today, and frankly
today.
for the past decade.
And between you and me and the doorpost, in doing so, they could exact from Netanyahu some concessions that would make them real happy. Okay, well, we'll support this coalition, but if we get these ministries, the way it's always been done,
That's yeah,
because
that's the system of government. Look, it's the same thing
that's the horse
elsewhere.
trading in the parliamentary system,
That's how it works.
But then we have a center right left coalition that has to pact with extreme left or lunatic parties, or a center right coalition that has to pact with extreme religious parties. Uh, but as you say, is that stupid center that makes it personal and put their personal grievances ahead of the nation and the party.
Now, look, I think it points to the fact that at some point Israel may have to write a constitution or something
Yeah.
like that. Now, that's a very difficult thing to do in reverse. We had founding
Oh
fathers that
God.
did that. They labored over that for a long period of time to come up with what I think, and I know many others think, is still the best founding type of documents for a country. Um, and this is why I said in the beginning of our conversation that our allies, especially in the Middle East, can learn from us, but they should not have to replicate what we do. It has to work in their context. Both Israel, which is the Jewish state, Saudi Arabia, which is the quintessential Islamic state, it's the seat of the two holy mosques,
Yeah.
they're going to have to come up with their own system. For Saudi Arabia, when you look at the 2030 vision, it's not like a this is Sharia law type of thing. It pays homage to Islam and discusses the reform that they want to have. In Israel, there's always going to be, at least until there's not, but there's going to be an interplay between the fact that it is a Jewish state and it has to have forms of Jewish law. Like Sunday is always going to be its Monday. Sabbath is always going to be Saturday. That's how it works, Friday night into Saturday. And
Yep.
they've had a lot of practice with being formed as a more socialist country. Netanyahu actually was
Yep.
finance minister, as I recall, in the 90s, who was trying to reform Israel to make it more of a capitalistic type of society. But
And
this
he
push and
succeeded
pull is going to
enormously.
continue.
And he succeeded enormously when he
Correct.
was
And
finance
and
minister.
those always come with growing pains. So
Yeah.
on a legal sense, this is going to have to happen. But Israel should not feel compelled. And frankly, American Jews who've been enlisted by, unfortunately, the left in Israel, horrible mistake,
Yep.
is trying to get the left American Jews involved. And the advice that they're giving is to like basically copy us, America. What we have does not work for them. Much of what we have does, but
You,
they
you know,
need.
you know, it may backfire if they do occupy the Temple Mount.
Well, yeah.
Yes.
It depends. The
Well,
occupation
Wall
of the Temple
Street,
Mount could have happened
Wall
in
Street, we cannot
'67. That's
live
an
with.
entire different thing.
Right, Wall Street we cannot live with, but if you occupy certain areas in Jerusalem, you are unleashing forces you don't even know.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
we have a track record of uh,
yeah, of doing
for thousands
stupid
of years
things.
of not having that turn out really well for us.
By the way, to end on a somewhat, I would say humorous note, but will there ever be? No, the first one. When you speak of the Shabbat and all that jazz, I'm for an ecumenical Shabbat. I think that we should all take off on Thursday night and not come back till Monday.
Sounds very European. I could get
And
behind
and
that.
that would cover Islam, Judaism, and Christianity all in one, and nobody could complain.
Look, for me, that's totally fine because I know the amount of work I have to do in a given week and I work until it's done. I don't necessarily stop like I hear the
Uh,
horn in the Flintstones at 5 o'clock in the evening. I'll keep going. As long as you get your stuff done, then fine. 3 days, of course, and it
yeah,
fits
why
in this
not?
paradigm.
Make it one as long as you get the work done.
Right.
And the last one here, with all the changes going on, do you think it's possible in your lifetime, if not on mine, that we will ever see people share the Temple Mount in peace?
I mean, I think they already do share the Temple Mount to the extent it will be shared. I mean, obviously, Jews would like to have more of it would like to be able to pray openly on the Temple Mount. Look, I don't, I don't foresee. Look, I mean, I know that there's the peace process industry is made. The we have to hope, and I hope, and therefore it will be in my lifetime, and that's why, and and so give us your money. That's their line.
Yeah,
Look,
that's a lie.
you never lose money in the Middle East betting on crappy things happening, unfortunately. So look,
Somebody screwing it up.
right. So, and the Temple Mount is certainly one of those areas. I mean, it's not. It's the capital of Saudi Arabia is not Mecca, where the Kaaba is.
Yes.
Istanbul.
No, that is under the governor of Mecca and Medina. Is not the capital, and there are areas that no foreigner can go in, regardless of the tourist visas.
Right. So the idea, uh, according to the new form Palestinian nationalism, that of course our capital must be Jerusalem. Like, no, it doesn't. You could have,
Yeah,
I mean,
that I don't think will ever happen. Period. End of story.
right.
But I do harbor hopes that, and by the way, I part of my hopes is that the new national Palestinian, I'll go ahead and say it, fascism, doesn't survive long because it is national socialism with a Palestinian flag, founded by Nazis, run by Nazis, trained by Nazis, and still populated by latter day Nazis, from Amin al Husseini through Arafat to these uh, Black September terrorist that calls himself the president of the Palestinian Authority. Uh, I have zero tolerance for those. But I think they will eventually, as other things give, I'm hopeful that these people are going to be beat back into oblivion, which I think is the only possible solution there.
Look, the current international context seems to continue to be that we do not allow Israel to win.
Yes,
They're the only country, frankly, in the world that can't win, or at least we define for them what their victory is. So,
yes,
uh, and people who are defeated tend to only accept, like if you're Japan in 1945, it took a lot for them to realize we can't continue going on. We're going to have to accept
yeah,
we're going to have to accept what it is they have on the table for us and surrender. That's the international institutions, the left in the United States keeps trying to give them reasons to continue fighting on, which will only be really bad for their own people and for frankly everyone
yeah,
else. Um, but that's what they do. Look, for the Temple Mount area itself, for Jerusalem, it would be nice to see all religions have access there as much as they can. It's an incredibly difficult thing, and the fact is, I simply wouldn't trust any authority, frankly, other than the Israelis, to guarantee that. I think history has
to guarantee
has proven that out.
that
Right.
peace. Yes,
And
yes, I agree.
it's compared to the crap that we see on Western television, it came as a shock to a lot of Emiratis who decided to come to Israel because the Abraham Accords, how easy it is to go visit Jerusalem. the Arab parts, the Jewish parts, the Christian, Armenian,
Yep.
whatever quarter you wanted to see, you could do all of that. It's not that difficult. And I would invite all the Palestinians, not that I can do that, but hey,
No.
I would simply say to other people, if you want to go see the Center of Islam, go to Saudi Arabia, visit Makkah. I'm sure they'd be happy to
Yeah.
have you. And that's the number one site in Islam. There's
Yes,
really only
indeed.
one number one site. Only one major number one site in Judaism, and that's that's Jerusalem.
And that's Jerusalem. Okay, I think we've done an hour. I could talk with you for 3 hours and not feel the pain, but all
You'd
things
have to
must come
start
to
pouring
an
the
end.
scotch long distance, though.
Hmm?
You'd have to start pouring the scotch long distance in order for that to
Yes.
happen.
Yeah, you know that one of these days we'll meet in DC again and do it far more comfortably than this. But in the meantime, uh, I really appreciate your stopping by. I think we've learned a thing or two, and I look forward to doing this again sometime, and our next working meeting as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care. I'm going to take you off screen now, but if you want to talk a little bit more, I'll be back with you in a moment. And thank you so much. I hope that you've enjoyed Matt's visit as much as I have, and that these helped you get a better understanding of Saudi Arabia today and the Middle East. And please don't forget, if you want to make a contribution to the Gold Institute for International Strategy, you have a link underneath. That is this one. And it is in the description of the show so that you can, at your leisure, come back to it. It's going to be a tax deductible contribution to the extent permitted by law. And you can always click on support in Odyssey and whatever it is now in YouTube to support this program so that we can continue doing them. And thank you so much and have a good night.